It's a new day on Deep Space Nine, and O'Brien is worried about Keiko. She's gone off for a botanical field trip to the Gamma Quadrant, which would be dangerous enough even without her being pregnant. We'll leave him to his stress and move to Quark's. He's back home from a trip to Ferenginar and is in an unusually affectionate mood with Rom, the underappreciated brother. It might be to do with the business deal he concluded, all the time spent visiting their mother, or it might be connected with the news that he has an incurable disease and only a week to live. A physical for his insurance turned up a condition only 1 in 5 million Ferengi get, and it's a diagnosis from a particularly expensive doctor, which, in Ferengi culture, means he's the most reliable. Rom suggests waiting for a second opinion from Bashir, but his diagnoses are free, which is just another way of saying worthless. That means settling up his affairs, which involves paying off his debts, at least the ones to other Ferengi, because they're the only contracts that count. All of which is going to be a problem, as he's got quite a lot of creditors, and not many ways of paying. Rom thinks he could sell discs of his desiccated remains to make the money, a tradition among more notable Ferengi. He's had quite the eventful life after all, and was briefly Grand Nagus for a while. Quark is unconvinced, his connection with Starfleet considered a liability in both his eyes and those of other Ferengi, he thinks, but sees no harm in trying to make a quick strip of latinum off his corpse, so agrees to try. While Quark goes off to sell his body, we've got a problem up in Ops. The mega-shuttle carrying Keiko, along with Kira and Bashir, is coming through the wormhole, and it's a little bit on fire. To the infirmary we go, where we learn that everything's fine. Well, sort of. All the passengers are safe, including the one who isn't born yet, though we have had to make a few alterations. Long story short, an oopsie with some asteroids resulted in the mega-shuttle having a few minor kabooms, one of which injured Keiko. She'll be fine after some surgery, but it was affecting the baby, so Bashir had to move him to the only other available womb. While that process went well, and Bashir anticipates no problems, differences in Bajoran biology mean Kira's already linked to the child in ways that would be very harmful to undo, and that means Kira will be carrying their child to term. Quark's corpse has had some interest. Well, that's a little generous perhaps, as it's had a single bid, a relatively small amount that just so happens to correspond exactly with Rom's life savings, his status as underappreciated brother meaning that he was never particularly well paid. The inevitable argument about this whole thing being a bad idea is interrupted by another bid, a big bid, and anonymous too. This confuses Quark until he concludes it must be the Grand Nagus himself, Zek having involved Quark in a few of his schemes. The generosity doesn't quite ring true for Rom, but in the absence of another explanation, and fearing that the offer might be withdrawn if the Nagus comes to his senses, Quark accepts the bid. He's finally made his fortune, and all it cost him was his life. It's enough to take care of all his debts, including ones to the cousin who tried to kill him with a dodgy ship near the start of the season. I guess Quark takes rules about debt more seriously than he does. He's moved on to funeral arrangements by the time Bashir arrives with a message. A doctor on Ferenginar just gave him a call and said to pass on that he made a mistake and Quark doesn't have anything wrong with him after all. It's a double win for Quark, as, along with the news that he's not dying, he's also in line for some tasty medical malpractice compensation. We're only 17 minutes into the episode though, so obviously the universe still has a way of turning it all to shit. This one comes in the form of a visit from Brunt of the Ferengi Commerce Authority. That would be bad enough under most circumstances, not least of which because Quark took a pasting the last time he was here. This one manages to be worse somehow, as he's come to collect what he's owed. You see, he's the one who bought Quark's corpse. News that Quark is no longer going to die is ignored. They have a contract, and Brunt wants it fulfilled. He's got hundreds of ideas for the unpleasant things he wants to do to Quark's remains, because Brunt has a particular dislike for him. He thinks being here around the Federation has made Quark soft. In fact, he knows it. He's aware of Quark caving to the Union and covering up his mother's profits. He even knows Quark used to sell smuggled food to the Bajorans back during the occupation. That's not an issue in itself, of course, as a bit of healthy smuggling is to be commended. The issue is that he had them over a barrel, and rather than bleed them dry, he chose to sully himself with altruism by charging only a tiny profit. It's enough to make a true Ferengi sick. Quark's a dealer, though, and still thinks he can get out of this. Brunt agrees. He can break the contract. Of course, reneging on a contract with another Ferengi would mean he and his family would be stripped of everything they own, and he'd be exiled. No other Ferengi would ever talk to him, let alone do business, for fear of a similar fate. That prospect is unthinkable to Quark, but Brunt doesn't much care. Either choice would remove the taint of Quark from Ferengi society, and that's all that matters. Keiko is recovered enough to be mobile, at least with help. She's understandably missing the child she was carrying until a few days ago, and so is O'Brien. They consider inviting Kira to dinner regularly, but even that isn't going to be enough. While they contemplate solutions, we'll see what Quark has decided his will be. He's visiting Plain Simple Garak, and it's not to buy a funeral suit. Except, well, it kind of is, as he wants Plain Simple Garak to utilize the skills of his former career and kill him. Rom, the underappreciated brother, is aghast, but Quark is adamant. He's a Ferengi businessman and intends to die like one, even if that does mean it'll be a little ahead of schedule. Back to the O'Brien household, and Kira is here for a visit. They're taking good care of her, Kira still adapting to being visibly pregnant, and invites her to join them for dinner. As a matter of fact, it'll give them a chance to talk about an idea O'Brien and Keiko have had, something they'd like Kira to give a little thought. Plain Simple Garak is murderizing Quark. He's been murderizing Quark for quite some time, but Quark has found every approach unsavory or disrespectful. The underlying issue is that Quark doesn't want to know it's happening, and that's a request Plain Simple Garak thinks he can fulfill. The downside of not knowing how it'll happen is that Quark is now seeing danger everywhere. He ducks and dives his way to his bedroom and, after establishing that he's definitely alone, tries to sleep. He awakes in a room entirely covered in gold and assumes Plain Simple Garak has made good on his promise and he's in the divine treasury, the Ferengi afterlife. Not so, says a Ferengi that looks suspiciously like his brother, but is actually Gint, the very first Grand Nagus. He says this is just a dream. See, Quark's subconscious very much wants him to continue breathing, so he's conjured up an imagined version of Gint to give himself permission to break the rules of acquisition. They're all just made up anyway, a set of guidelines that also happen to be a bestseller and make Gint a shitload of cash. Quark's headmeat isn't entirely sure, though, and Dream Brunt makes an appearance to remind him what'll happen if he breaks the rules. His imagination starts arguing with itself, and Quark's caught in the middle. He wakes trying to strangle himself, though it would appear he's made a decision. Brunt is in the bar accosting a Darbo girl when Quark finds him. He's here to break the contract, and Brunt is delighted. Brunt's slightly less delighted when Quark threatens to kill him if he ever comes back, but he cheers up a bit when he tells all of Quark's customers that the bar and its owner are now considered forbidden to all other Ferengi, and slaps up a prohibition notice while claiming all the bar's contents. Kira's back at the O'Brien quarters, and she's brought a bag. That's because she's going to be moving in for a few months until the baby arrives. Keiko shows her to her room, and Molly immediately lays claim to playing rights in it. If Molly wanted space, she could have used Quark's bar. Brunt's taken everything but a single chair, possibly so Quark can view his destitution in comfort. He prefers to sit on the floor, and he won't accept comfort from Rom, the underappreciated brother, either. His misery is cut short by Bashir arriving with some booze. He was given a case of the stuff by a patient, he says, but it tastes like complete arse gravy, so either Quark can sell it to unsuspecting customers, or it'll get punted into the nearest star. Dax follows suit with some hideous glasses, a gift from a relative, she says. Cisco goes one better, but then he's got a whole station to plunder. The furniture he has people bringing in is to make room for repair work, he says, and he's commandeering Quark's bar to store it. If it gets used in the meantime, well, that can't be avoided. The bar slowly fills up with an eclectic collection of shite as Quark watches, so we'll leave him to be helped out by his real fortune, and not consider what might be happening to his mum right now, until the next adventure. Thus completes the low point of Quark's varied and eventful business career. Deep Space Nine's resident dodgy bastard is brought low by the very rules he worshipped. He loses everything as a result, and in so doing, finds he has riches that Brunt can never confiscate. During the process, we learn that the central tenets of Ferengi society, those rules of acquisition, aren't mere cultural taboos, but legally enforceable laws. It would be remiss of me to not point out that this gives us our single potential flaw in the plot, though. The entire thing hinges on the rules of acquisition being immutable, and Brunt leaving Quark destitute when he finally does break Rule 17, a contract is a contract is a contract, but only between Ferengi. The problem is, that's not the first rule he broke in the episode. Back in the very first season, we were told rule of acquisition number 1, once you have their money, you never give it back. Quark trying to provide Brunt with a refund is already a violation of this rule. Perhaps some rules are more strictly enforced than others, or carry different penalties, but that seems to contradict Brunt during the dream sequence. I'm here to remind you of the consequences of disregarding the rules. Not rules singular in reference to 17, but rules plural in reference to them all. Of course, that was during a dream sequence, so there's still enough wiggle room to kind of make it work, but it would have been pleasing to have Brunt throw the rule in Quark's face when he first tried to offer a refund, instead of simply declining. It might also have served to increase Quark's sense of helplessness. None of that detracts from what the episode was trying to do, though, so it can be safely overlooked. What we get is a story about either a rigid rule set forcing out one of its most versatile devotees, or the cultural influence of the Federation buggering up yet another random person's life. I'll leave you to decide which one was the point, or perhaps what percentages of each. While we're on the topic of precisely what caused Quark's downfall, an idea occurred to me while watching the episode, and I'll warrant a fair few of you thought the same thing. Brunt seemed very well informed for someone who had no reason to be other than disliking Quark. Hearing about his medical diagnosis, ready to bid on those remains, able to get to the station at very short notice. Why, it's almost as though he could have had a hand in it. Now, I'll be the first to admit there are a fair few arguments against this. Threatening a doctor into giving a false diagnosis wouldn't be hard for Brunt, but there are other places where the whole thing falls down. The likelihood of Quark choosing to sell his desiccated remains is a sticking point, for example, as he was coaxed into the idea by his brother. He was also told to get a second opinion, so if that had happened instead, the truth would have come out. As plans go, there are quite a lot of moving parts that could have scuppered the whole thing, and left the dodgy doctor open to legal shenanigans if Quark didn't get snared. None of that would have affected Brunt, though, if it failed. Fear of reprisals would have kept the Doctor quiet, so he's got plausible deniability for the whole lot. It's possible that, under the circumstances, he'd have been fine with rolling the dice on a long shot. In fact, for all we know, this might not even be his first scheme, and the others just didn't land. Why have only one con running when you could try many? We'll never know for certain, but it's a fun possibility. Two more things before we wrap up then. The first is the writers using Nunna Visitor's genuine pregnancy as a plot element without tying her character to a child in the long term, which I think is worth some points for the creativity. The last is something that's starting to show the signs of a pattern. Quark has now become the third resident of Deep Space Nine to have significant beef with his own people. Plain simple Garak was exiled here, Odo rejected his people to stay here, a point we'll be revisiting again very soon, and now Quark's been told to get stuffed by his lads as well. A casual observer could be forgiven for thinking the place was cursed. Perhaps that's just me finding patterns where there are none, but I can't help noting something similar happened with Voyager. What began as Paris and B'Elanna having troubled childhoods turned into the shit parent support group when 7 of 9 and Ramrod were added as well. A cynical person might suggest that something shown to have worked for one character might plausibly be reused for others, but who knows? Maybe it is just a coincidence and plain simple Garak was wrong about not trusting them. End of episode.
Is anything happening yet?
Not that I can tell.
He's leaving it a bit late, don't you think?
Who?
The guy who writes these. There's usually at least an hint of how things are going to turn out by this point. He's got to resolve all of this on the next one and get us ready for a new plot.
Maybe he's forgotten about us.
I think the fact that I've still got a voice suggests he hasn't, but for the purposes of the story, let's pretend it's possible.
Or maybe he can't do anything. He's the one making these videos, so I presume he only has control of the stuff in the editing software. If we're outside of the timeline, perhaps he has no way of helping.
Sounds unlikely, but I guess we'll find out in a few days. What do you want to do till then?
Well, as we've already watched every episode of Nightmare ever made,
Just what I was thinking. Let's watch him again. Woof.